For many years, researchers argued over what best defines an emotion. Are facial expressions the most important response to an emotional event? Certainly they change with emotional states. What about the feelings emotions trigger inside? Are those the most relevant responses? Or is it instead the physical changes in the body, like a racing heart, that tell us about emotions? Researchers came together on this fairly recently and now recognize that we can best understand emotions by considering the many responses that accompany them. So the modern view is to leave nothing out and view emotion as a process. So let's take a quick look at the emotion process, since emotional responses are the end result. First, there's some sort of antecedent event, something that triggers the emotion. There are lots of examples. For me, seeing a puppy or kittens automatically makes me happy. So these stimuli are antecedent to the emotion of happiness for me. Other antecedent events, such as an upcoming exam, might invoke feelings of panic or anxiety for some people. Others get totally freaked by spiders. These stimuli are antecedent to the emotion of fear. What all of these antecedent events have in common is that they prompt us to make an appraisal, which is the next step in the emotion process where we make sense of the thing we have encountered. Depending upon the results of the appraisal, there is an emotional response, which is actually a collection of responses by the body and brain. These can be categorized as physiological changes, behavioral-expressive changes, and subjective changes, which will be the focus of this tricky topic. These three changes represent the body's response to an emotional event. They each have a different function to help us deal with emotional situations. Physiological changes are changes in the body that come with emotions, like changes in heart rate. Behavioral-expressive changes involve observable behavioral responses. The most obvious of these in humans are facial expressions. Subjective emotional experiences are what we call feelings. Physiological changes are mainly controlled by the autonomic nervous system, which has two divisions: the sympathetic, also called fight or flight, and whose neurons exit from the middle of the spinal cord, and the parasympathetic, also known as rest and digest, and originates from the cranial nerves and posterior spinal cord. Fight or flight responses get activated with intense emotions, like terror or excitement. There are a whole host of autonomic changes, but the ones we notice most often are racing heart and increases in respiration. The rest and digest responses are activated when we're relaxed and content, and these are less noticeable because heart rate and respiration relax. All of these responses are involuntary, so we don't have a lot of conscious control over them. The behavioral expressive changes involve observable body movements, and of course, what we humans notice most is what happens on the face. We're wired to respond to faces. Newborn babies even mimic the facial expressions of adults. But how can we study these facial expressions? How do psychologists manipulate and measure them? The Facial Action Coding System, or FACS, is a widely used method developed by emotion researcher Paul Ekman. He had volunteers move different combinations of facial muscles and had coders score all observable muscular movements possible on the human face. He found that certain combinations of muscles were interpreted as specific emotions by others who observed them. It's widely accepted that these behavioral changes in the face are important for communicating emotional states, and cross-cultural research indicates this is universal. Some other interesting research on the facial action coding system has revealed that true and fake emotions are expressed differently on the face. Which smile looks more genuine, the one on the left or the one on the right? Most people would choose the one on the left. This smile is called a Duchenne smile, after the French anatomist who first described it. Why was an anatomist interested in smiling? Well, it turns out that genuine happy smiles involve contracting not only the muscles of the mouth, but also the band of muscles that surround the eye. Because facial expressions are used to display emotions to others, sometimes we suppress them when we want to conceal them. The term poker face refers to a blank expression that can't be read by others. We have much more control over behavioral emotional responses than physiological changes. Subjective changes are internal personal responses, and what we typically refer to as feelings. Each emotion creates a unique feeling. Anger feels different than happiness. In fact, our internal experiences help distinguish different emotions. For example, both fear and anger increase heart rate, but they are experienced very differently and triggered by different antecedent events. The subjective nature of feelings means that the only way we can measure them is to ask people using a self-report. So, this aspect of emotion can really only be studied in individuals with verbal ability. Given the diversity of reactions to emotional events, measuring emotional responses comprehensively requires a large toolkit. Physiological changes are usually detected by measuring some aspect of autonomic nervous system function associated with arousal, such as heart rate, blood pressure, and respiration. The polygraph, or lie detector test, is based on the assumption that telling a lie creates anxiety or tension. Although the liar might try to hide this tension by altering facial expressions and movements, it's difficult to control what's happening inside the body. Behavioral responses can be measured by observing an individual under different emotional conditions, and if this is done in humans, facial expressions are the easiest behavior to detect. Although facial expressions of emotion appear to be universal across all humans, we can easily exaggerate or suppress our emotional displays, and therefore they might not be as accurate a predictor of emotions compared to physiological responses. Subjective feelings are measured by self-report, usually with some sort of rating scale for intensity of different emotions. One issue with this is that nonverbal individuals, such as babies and animals, cannot complete self-reports, so we infer how they're feeling by other behaviors. So the emotional response is multifaceted and complex, and still not completely understood.